Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. This is the postgame podcast for the Timberwolves win over the OKC Thunder on Thursday night, the second night of a back-to-back. Shorthanded Wolves missing 4 rotation players, and yet they pull it out. We'll talk about how they did it. Yes, Naz Reid, Jaylen Clark on SGA. Lots of exciting stuff from the bench guys, the young players. It's all upcoming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Happy Friday, everybody. Happy weekend. Happy All-Star weekend. And the Wolves are going into it on a extremely positive note. 24 hours after a really disappointing performance against the Milwaukee Bucks, a loss against the Giannis-less and Dame-less Bucks team on Wednesday night at home. 24 hours later, against the Thunder team that had to come back late against Miami 24 hours prior and then traveled to Minnesota, the Wolves really put the screws to the Thunder the first time all year OKC has not led. It was a wire-to-wire loss. They did tie the game in the second half, but OKC never had a lead in this one. For the first time this season, it was just their 10th loss, now 55-ish or so games into the season. So very impressive Wolves performance despite having, of course, no Julius Randle or Dante DiVincenzo, still no Mike Conley, and Rudy Gobert missed the game. He was a game-time decision with a back injury and did not play. A really impressive performance from the Wolves, and really a lot to get to in this one, and all positive. I don't even know that I'm going to do a full studs and duds in this game because it just seemed like everybody that saw the floor played really well for the Wolves. So lots to get to today on the show. Big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And a reminder, you can subscribe to the daily Locked On Wolves newsletter at lockedondaily.com. You'll get a newsletter Monday through Friday. It's one stop for ultimate Wolves and NBA coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at lockedondaily.com. All right, there's a lot to get to in this one. There really is. The Wolves played great. I already kind of set this up. I mean, missing 3 regular starters. You could go DiVincenzo, Gobert, and Julius Randle. You're also missing Mike Conley. So that's 4 of your top 7 rotation guys, 4 of your top 8 rotation guys. And Jaylen Clark gets his first career start a night after not playing all that well on Wednesday against Milwaukee. He struggled offensively in this game too, but he was great defensively. We'll get into that, but that was notable. Chris Finch, also notable here off the top, kind of, so even with the short bench, he played an 8-man rotation, and he actually gave Josh Minott 2 rotation minutes too. It was end of the third quarter when this was still it remained a relatively close game for the whole thing. I shouldn't say that. The Wolves never completely got up by 20 plus, and it never felt over until it finally was, although the Thunder never had a lead. All that to say, Minott played a couple of rotation minutes. Finch played Terrence Shannon 29 minutes off the bench. Luka Garza played 15 minutes, most of which was not garbage time, and played well. So there's really a lot to talk about in this one. What stands out the most, and that's where I'll start, was the tone the Wolves set in the first quarter. And that's extra notable because it's been such an issue for the Wolves this season. I mean, just the night prior against Milwaukee, they came out flat and they ended flat. That's often been the problem. It's the middle stages. There were times the last couple of seasons where the third quarter, remember for a while, the Wolves were like the worst third quarter team in the league. I think it was the year before last. And, there were all these questions about Finch and adjustments at halftime and all this stuff, because there's always questions about Chris Finch, despite the fact he's, the most successful Wolves coach this side of Flip Saunders during the Kevin Garnett years. But the first quarter and the fourth quarter have been the problems this year. Coming out flat, not playing physical, not playing active early, missing a bunch of open shots. That's what happened against Milwaukee, and then closing games, which sometimes you could point at the coaches for execution, but a lot of times it's the players failing to execute in the fourth quarter, and that's been a problem. Well, guess what? Those were the best quarters for the Wolves in this game. They came out super physical, super aggressive, super active in the first quarter. And I could, like, unfortunately, probably count on at least my hands and feet, my fingers and toes, how many times that's happened this year, 56 games in. The Wolves just come out flat far too often. That was not the case in this one. They took the fight to OKC. They beat the Thunder at their own game, which is physicality, activity, length, athleticism, playing with energy. Something the Wolves did to teams all over last year. I mean, look at what they did to Denver at times in that series. Look what they did to Phoenix in the first round. Look what they did on the way to 56 regular season wins a year ago. And too often this year, the Wolves have come out too cool for school. They've come out flat offensively, and they aren't able, because they're playing too cool for school and the energy's not there. They're not able to make up for the flat offense and, frankly, flat jump shooting with the defense, because the defense isn't doing anything to write home about either. At least not to the level where you can paper over or I don't know, like cover up some of what you're messing up on the offensive side. And to be clear, like, big picture, the offense and the defense are pretty good. This is still a team that's 6 above 500, but I'm talking about the first quarter specifically. And the Wolves were very physical against a very physical Thunder team. I mean, Isaiah Hartenstein's a physical player. He's a good player, and he's a physical player. SGA plays physical. Lou Dort, Jalen Williams, these guys play extremely physical. And the Wolves did not get out physical. I thought starting Jaylen Clark and putting him on SGA right out of the gate was a really smart decision by the coaching staff. And SGA got his. I mean, he still got to the line 11 times. He only turned it over once. He got 9 assists. He scored 24 points. But guess what? It took him 21 shots to get 24 points. He only squeezed the trigger twice on threes. And he was actually a minus 12 in this game. The worst mark of any Thunder starter. Jaylen Clark did an outstanding job on SGA. And I thought he was at times slightly out of position against Milwaukee. The game before that, Monday night in the loss to Cleveland, I thought he struggled a little bit too. I wanted him to be better against the Cavs dynamic backcourt. But this Jaylen Clark looked a lot like the one we saw going back to last week, go back to Saturday, and a full week ago, middle of last week. He was physical. He was in SGA's jersey. The technique he used, he was very physical on the perimeter. But what's the book on SGA? He's going to, get you on your heels, and then he's going to pull up somewhere in the mid-range or close to the rim, draw the foul, and try and get an and one. And Jaylen Clark was physical up until the point where it was clear what SGA was going to try and do. And he literally, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm pulling back from the microphone, right? He would pull back, not get caught with his hand in the cookie jar. He would go straight up, put his hands up so it's clear he wasn't reaching, he wasn't fouling. And SGA still almost made a bunch of shots because he's a really good player. I'm not at all taking anything away from SGA. But the shot becomes tougher when you're anticipating the contact and it doesn't come. And there were a couple SGA shots he banked hard that rimmed out because he shot them so hard. And that's typically what happens when you're expecting the contact that isn't there. It was just such intelligent defense from Jaylen Clark and executed really perfectly. If you could make SGA shoot 6 of 21 from the field and only make 1 3 and that's great. That's the recipe to beat the OKC Thunder, because then somebody else has to beat you. And J-Dub only had, he shot 8 of 17 and nobody else had more than 14 points. I mean, Chet Holmgren only had 11 points on 7 shots. It's another area the Wolves were really good. And side note, I'm curious to see how Chet and Hartenstein play together long term. This is only a small handful of games now that they've both been healthy and on the floor together. Fascinated to see what that looks like for them. I'm not saying that they're worse with them on the floor. I'm not at all saying that. I'm just interested to see. The Wolves aren't the only team that's had a learning curve with bigs, right? It's not a Wolves specific issue. To see how they function with those guys on the floor together is going to be absolutely interesting. And the Thunder don't have a whole lot of big man depth beyond that. They're happy to play small. And in this game, in part because of the Wolves' injury issues and also because of the way the Thunder play, the Wolves actually went to Luka Garza for 12, 13 rotation minutes in this game. But all that to say, having Jaylen Clark guard SGA was awesome. He did a great job shadowing him, being physical where he could, and then avoiding getting his hand caught in the cookie jar as much as possible. And yeah, SGA still got to the line 11 times. but I thought that was really, really impressive. I want to talk about the Wolves on offense. Some of the impressive stuff they did there. We'll talk about their, some other areas in which they were super physical. And perhaps the most important thing, which I easily could have led with, the lack of turnovers, especially compared to how they played OKC back 6 weeks ago in the first matchup between these two teams this season. So we'll get to all those items here next. NBA fans, get ready. Today's episode is sponsored by our friends at DoorDash. Right now, get ready. They swoosh, you save, thanks to Dash Pass. Every time a player drops 50 or more points in a game, you score a huge deal the next day. And there's a Timberwolves player who's just waiting to drop 50 plus in a game this season. It's really simple. When any player scores 50 or more in a game during this regular season, 2024 to 25, Dash Pass members get 50% off their order, up to $10 off the next day from noon to midnight. So no Wolves games this weekend, but say next week when they come out of the All-Star break, say Ant drops 50 on Friday night. That means the next day on Saturday, you could get 50% off an order, up to $10 off the next day from noon to midnight. Maybe there's another, I don't know if there is a Wolves game next Saturday, but maybe it's a game day feast when you're watching college basketball that Saturday after an epic 50-point performance from Ant or whoever it is. It could be anybody. It doesn't have to be Ant. It doesn't have to be a Wolves player. Any NBA player, celebrate by ordering wings, pizza, or burgers from your favorite spot delivered straight to your door. Maybe you just want lunch the next day. If you just need a quick and easy lunch after an exciting 50-point performance the night prior, with Dash Pass, you get your favorite meals with $0 delivery fees and reduced service fees. Plus, now you save even more with this exclusive NBA offer. Sign up for Dash Pass and be ready to save. When any player scores 50 or more in a game, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order the next day, up to $10 off. Just use promo code NBA50 from noon to midnight after a 50-point game on eligible orders at participating merchants. Must have an active Dash Pass account. Terms apply. Visit DoorDash to learn more. All right, so the Timberwolves did a great job on SGA. That's point number one. Well, actually, point number one is the physicality overall they played with defensively. And an extension of that, moving past, and actually, I mean, the SGA thing is part of it because of how Jaylen Clark and others, Jaden did a good job when he was on him. They blitzed him a bunch too, to be clear. And the Wolves also mixed in quite a bit of zone in this game, which I thought was super smart. I mean, like, there's guys on OKC that can shoot threes, but that's not like how they're going to beat you, right? They're going to beat you. It's a little bit, again, like last year's Minnesota team, where the Wolves could beat you by shooting threes. They ended up actually shooting the best percentage in the league from outside the arc, but their three-point rate wasn't like insane. OKC's middle of the pack in terms of three-point rate. They're middle of the pack in terms of percentage. They're not going to crush you from outside the arc. I mentioned Shai only made 1 3. He averages 2 makes on 6 attempts for the season. He's 36%. That's pretty good. So if you can limit him to 2 attempts and 1 make, you'll take that, right? Lou Dort's a 41% three-point shooter on 5.5 attempts per game. And the Wolves, I mean, he was 2 of 6 in this game. So below what he would average. He averages, or at least in terms of, slightly below what he averages in terms of makes per game. You could go on down the list. The Wolves did a good job of limiting the 3-point line for SGA and for the Thunder more broadly. But the zone was obviously not to allow SGA to shoot threes, but let's make some of these other guys beat us. And I think they mixed it in just the right amount. Like Isaiah Joe's another good example. He shoots over 40%. He was 0 for 4. So there was some good fortune there. But by mixing up their coverages, by blitzing SGA, by mixing in some zone, the Wolves did enough to keep the Thunder off balance. I mean, this is a really good OKC offense. It's a top 5 offense league wide, and they only scored 101 points, 42% shooting, and 24% on threes in this game. The other thing I want to talk about related to physicality is the rebounding. Minnesota had 20 offensive rebounds in this game. Look no further than my show on Wednesday. Go back and listen to Wednesday's Locked On Wolves. I did a whole show on the Timberwolves shift in offense and the importance of offensive rebounding with this suddenly new look Timberwolves team. And even without Rudy Gobert, who's been an offensive rebound machine over the last couple of weeks, the Timberwolves had 20 offensive rebounds. Naz Reid had 4. Luka Garza had 6 in 15 minutes. And Terrence Shannon had 3 in 29 minutes. coming out of the backcourt. We talked about Jaylen Clark being a good rebounding guard. He had 2 offensive rebounds in 24 minutes. He's had more offensive rebounds than defensive rebounds, I think, in every game he's played so far. The ability and the willingness to get in there and rebound and generate additional offensive opportunities was a massive reason that the Wolves won this game, because they didn't shoot the ball well either from outside the arc. OKC was 7 of 29. That's 24%. Guess what? The Wolves shot 17 more threes. They shot 46 threes. They only made 5 more threes than OKC. The Wolves were 26.1% on three-point attempts in this game. Naz was just 3 of 9. Ant was just 3 of 12. Jaylen Clark was 0 for 4 after, I think, an 0 for outside the arc the night before. Terrence Shannon was actually only 1 for 4. They struggled shooting threes, but they won this game because they attempted 11 more shots than Oklahoma City, in large part due to their 8 more offensive rebounds. And that then segues into my next point, which is the lack of turnovers. Minnesota only turned the ball over 10 times in this game, which is the same number that OKC turned it over. Okay? The last time these two teams played, go back to New Year's Eve, Minnesota actually only lost by 8 at OKC. In that game, Minnesota actually outshot OKC outside the arc. They were 40% outside the arc. The Wolves actually out offensive rebound OKC. They had 10 offensive rebounds. OKC only had 9. They were perfect from the free throw line, although they didn't get to the line very often. But the reason why the Wolves lost that game by 8 was because they turned it over 24 times and gave up 31 points off of turnovers in an 8-point loss. If you cut those turnovers in half, it's a win. I know it's not quite that simple. But think about that. 24 turnovers, twice as many turnovers as OKC, and also giving up 31 points on 24 turnovers is crazy. That's basically like 1.3 points per possession. And that's not a palatable number. It's an outlier if you look at the season. So this is a topic for another day. I actually don't hate the way the Wolves match up with OKC. Healthy, injured, whatever. They beat themselves. And to be very clear, I feel like I need to say this in case any Thunder fans are listening. OKC's great. They're the best team in the NBA. I'm not saying that they're not. But there are teams that are better and worse matchups for each other. Like the Mavs last year were a terrible matchup for the Timberwolves. OKC's not a bad matchup for Minnesota. And a lot of it is going to be how the games are officiated. Like, what referee crew do you have? How are they going to officiate it? That was a big thing last year in the playoffs because of how physical the Wolves were. Same thing with OKC and the Wolves. If the Wolves can match OKC's physicality, like in this game, and they don't turn it over like crazy, in part because of their physicality, taking the fight to OKC, they can beat the Thunder. It's not a terrible matchup for Minnesota. It really isn't, because they have the horses to guard SGA. You can go Jaden McDaniels. You can now go Jaylen Clark. Obviously, you still have Nikhil and you have Ant. There's tons of guys you can throw at Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And, well, it's a deep team, and I know Alex Caruso didn't play, and I get it. There's worse matchups for the Timberwolves because of all the things that the Thunder do well. They do a lot of things well. But the Wolves also do things well that kind of can match up with that, right? Like OKC doesn't turn it over a lot. The Wolves can go through stretches where they do a good job of turning teams over. OKC, I don't know, like they foul quite a bit, actually. That is the thing that they do. And I know that they were really upset with, like, you look up, I actually was surprised when I looked at the box score at the end of the game to see that OKC attempted actually more free throws. Yeah, OKC attempted 2 more free throws in Minnesota. I actually thought the Wolves got a decent whistle in this game. And but all that to say, OKC is actually third to last in the league in allowing opponent free throw attempts. So, like, that's another area the Wolves can put pressure on the Thunder and get and generate offense. But going back to the original point here related to turnovers, Minnesota lost that game at OKC on New Year's Eve because they turned it over twice as many times as the Thunder and gave up 31 points on 24 turnovers. Minnesota only turned it over 10 times in this game and gave up 14 points off those 10 turnovers. They only allowed 12 fast break points all game. Points in the paint, dead even. Both teams had 56. Turnovers, dead even. Both teams had 10. Free throws, Minnesota attempted 22. OKC attempted 24. The Wolves made their 2 extra free throws, or I should say OKC missed their 2 extra free throws. And Minnesota outshot the Thunder from outside the arc, but only slightly. This is a really even matchup. The first game, the outlier performance was the number of turnovers the Wolves had. In this game, perhaps it was the offensive rebounding, unless it's a feature and not a bug. And going back to Wednesday's show, it looks a lot like a feature for how this Wolves team wants to play. Even without Rudy Gobert on the floor, the Wolves said, hey, look, we're going to crash the glass. We're going to get as many opportunities, as many bites at the apple as we can get. And if the other team wants to try and run out and transition, fine. We're going to get multiple shots at this thing, especially in a game where you're not shooting the ball well. They didn't shoot it well on Wednesday night. And the Wolves just, they, you don't turn it over and you get 20 offensive rebounds, you're going to get 11 more shots up on the rim than the other team. That's exactly what happened in this one. Really impressive all the way around performance from the Wolves, and lack of turnovers, the number of offensive rebounds, the physicality they played with on both ends, the way they took the fight to SGA was all huge for Minnesota. All right, let's close with, we'll do studs and duds. We got to talk a bit about Naz. I kind of glossed over him. If you're watching on YouTube on that rundown, we will talk about Naz. And we'll peek ahead at what's next. We'll do all that here next on the show. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. There's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. If you're watching the Wolves, you feel like they're going to get a late-game rally, or you just want to pick a player to hit a clutch three, you'll never feel like you missed your chance. You can, always be in the game. The app is super easy to use. When you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook betting partner of the NBA. All right. So the studs and duds for this game. I like, there really aren't too many duds for the Wolves in this game. Like, they played well. I mentioned earlier the rotation. I guess now's as good a time as any to talk about it. But with Naz in the starting lineup, Nikhil in the starting lineup, Jaylen Clark in the starting lineup, and all the injuries the Wolves had, that meant that Terrence Shannon Jr. was effectively the sixth man in this game. Not effectively, he was. And he actually was fifth in minutes on the Wolves, only played 1 minute less than Nikhil in this game. Rob Dillingham played 21 minutes and played really well, especially after struggling as much as he has recently. And Chris Finch called him out, I think, after Wednesday's game. He was great. He had 5 assists, no turnovers in this game, scored 6 points, took it to the bucket, didn't shoot any threes, had a nice pull-up mid-ranger at one point. Luka Garza, he's been brutal for the last week. He was great in this game. 8 points, 8 rebounds, 6 offensive rebounds in 15 minutes played. Like, especially that second half stint was just very active. So yeah, like, the rotation was pretty interesting to me. Studs and duds, let's do that. So Naz had 27, 13, and 7. According to the TNT broadcast, it's the first game of his career. He's had 25 plus points, 10 plus rebounds, and 5 plus assists. And also, by the way, no turnovers for Naz Reid. And weirdly, like, I know he didn't shoot a great Wednesday, and he wasn't great Monday either. Remember how great he was on Saturday when he and Nikhil and who's the third Wolves player that had 20? Oh, Jaden. Those guys each had 20 plus in the game that Ant didn't play in. And then Naz went quiet the last couple games, struggled from outside the arc. But, he was due for some variance. He was due for some regression to the mean because he had been shooting the ball so well from deep. He was still 3 of 9 in this game. It also, he was 8 of 9 from 2-point range. I mean, that's because Naz doesn't shoot mid-range jumpers. So those were all but he did hit a couple of nice. He had a nice sky hook. He had a nice post move against Hartenstein where he just dropped him off at the rim and laid it in off the glass. He scored in every which way in this game. I think he had 2 and 1s as well in this one too. He added a block. A very well-rounded game from Naz Reid. I think he did everything well. They needed this type of a performance, and good for Naz. He gets 38 minutes, leads the team in minutes, and is able to put up the 27, 13, and 7 with a block and no turnovers. Really strong performance. Jaden McDaniels, awesome. Remember, he started very slow against Milwaukee, had a nice fourth quarter, but they needed him earlier. He was there. That I've been kind of poking at Jaden for the last year plus with that weird little floater, not floater, it's a fadeaway. And he's gotten better at it to the point where I don't think I can poke fun at him for taking it because it's a real weapon. Like, it's not the most efficient shot. It's not the shot you're searching for in every possession. But when the possession breaks down, when Jaden's got a smaller guy in him, you could do worse than the Jaden McDaniels weird leaning backward shot that he shoots. He was 8 of 12 on twos and 1 of 6 on threes. 6 rebounds, 5 assists, no turnovers for Jaden. He also, even more importantly, committed only 3 fouls in this game, so that was not an issue for him. But for Jaden to have a 21, 6, and 5 is very nice, especially with only 1 3-pointer made. And his big game the other night, I think that was Saturday, he didn't make a 3-pointer in that game either, or maybe he was 1 for 2. I think he was 0 for 1 from 3 in that game. And he was doing so much of his damage in the paint, in the mid-range. To have that element for both him individually to go to and for the Wolves as an offense to go to when things break down, that's really beneficial. And he was really good in this game. Third stud for me, it's got to be Terrence Shannon. We haven't even really talked about him yet. I talked about Jaylen Clark quite a bit, and he was vital. Missing the 4 threes hurt, and he actually only ended up playing 24 minutes, mostly because it was a little bit of foul trouble early on, but mostly because, like, offensively, he has struggled the last couple games, which is to be expected. I didn't think he'd be a very good offensive player in the NBA to start with at all, and he surprised me the first several games. But a couple of offers now from outside the arc, and only contributed 4 points. He did have 3 rebounds, 2 offensive, a couple of steals. But Terrence Shannon's who I want to talk about. I feel like after the last couple of games, I've just wanted to go back and read my scouting report and just read it off to you, what I said about Terrence Shannon when they drafted him. I was so on the pick overall because I thought there was different value on the board that I would have preferred. But my scouting report on him was, this dude's got an NBA body. He's 6'7" with a 6'9" wingspan, and he absorbs contact well. This is literally what I had typed out. Absorbs contact well on both ends of the floor. He's great in transition. He doesn't create in the half court, and he's not a consistent scorer, but he's a volume 3-point shooter with great range. He's a terror in transition. Can he be consistent on offense? Can he be consistent on defense? Which we saw. I can't think of a time when he was like blown by in this game, but we saw on Wednesday night he got beat a couple times off the dribble, just straight up, just got beat. He can be better. He does have a good NBA body. He plays hard. So it's the consistency thing. Now, we saw him create for himself a couple of times in the half court in this game, which I was pleasantly surprised by. Maybe some of that G League run has helped. I mean, they told him to go down and dominate, and he did. He was a game high plus 23 in a game the Wolves only won by 15. 13 points on 4 of 10. 1 of 4. He hit that first 3-point attempt from outside the arc, made all 4 of his free throws, was great in transition, had that block charge call go his way and upheld after challenge as well. 6 rebounds, including 3 offensive rebounds. Again, NBA body, decent, better than decent athleticism. He's not a freak athlete, but he's athletic on the plus side, right? 1 assist, 1 turnover, and active defensively. Like, I can't think of a great NBA comp. I struggle with this at draft time too. But I don't really know what he is, but I like TJ Shannon. I think he is a legit rotation guy, and maybe not every night at this point, and I don't think he will be, once everybody gets back. But it was hard for Chris Finch to take him off the floor in the second half of this game. He did because he was tired, but then he put him back in. Or no, second quarter is what I'm thinking of. In the moment, I was like, I can't take him out, but like, you have to give him a break at some point. Dude played almost 30 minutes in his like second game playing rotation minutes at the NBA level. He is a guy that's going to play rotation minutes long term. He's great at things the Wolves need, guys that like, they need the guys that can do stuff, right? Do some of that extra stuff. The Nikhils, potentially the Jaylen Clarks, on an on night, the Jaden McDaniels, and ideally what Josh Minott can give you. They also need guys that can do a couple of things really well, like play super hard, run guys over, be physical, knock down threes, and dunk on guys in transition. Like that skill set, that's TJ Shannon. And he, provided that in spades in this one. Okay. This weekend's the All-Star break. The Timberwolves, of course, have Leonard Miller participating in as part of the G League group of guys, and Ant in the big game on Sunday. I don't have much else to tell you about the All-Star break. I typically would, but like there's just less of a Wolves flavor, no 3-point contest. Obviously, Ant not doing the dunk contest. I don't think there's anybody in skills. So obviously I'll be watching it. I'll have thoughts on Monday. I always like to do a bit of an all-star recap sort of thing. So I'll give you the high points. Obviously, if Ant does something crazy, we'll talk about that. So I'll do all that on Monday. I'm not going to predict anything with the Wolves playing right up until the break. Man, I usually do that. Maybe I'll just do it off the cuff real quick. If I can find it real quick. I normally wouldn't do this, but why not? Let's see. Who's the participants in the 3-point contest? Okay. Dame again. So 3-point contest, without looking at the odds, okay? Without looking at the odds, I wouldn't take Cade. I wouldn't take Jalen Brunson. I like Buddy Hield and Tyler Hero would be my 2 picks. Now, we know Dame has won twice. I get that. And I think Norman Powell, I think he's more of a catch and shoot. I would go Hero or Hield are my 2 favorite, just kind of looking at the list for the 3-point contest. That's the only one I'm gonna predict on. But just the way those guys shoot, I don't think I'd go Cam Johnson, although he might be my 3rd choice. But Hield or Hero would be my choice without looking at the odds at FanDuel. But go do that. Anyway, that should be a ton of fun. We'll talk about that on Monday's show. We'll get you ready. Lots of stuff to cover next week. Probably have a couple of guests. We'll have a week full of shows before the Wolves get back at it. They don't play again until next Friday night, which is another national TV game. Of course, the Wolves are basically right now tied with the Clippers for 6th in the West, just ahead of the Mavs. Coming out of the break next Friday, a week from today, the Wolves are at Houston on ESPN, and then they play consecutive games against OKC. Next Sunday, back at home, their next home game is against the Thunder on ESPN, and then they play at OKC the very next night on NBA TV on February 24th. That's a Thunder Wolves back-to-back, literal 2 consecutive days playing each other. A really tough stretch of games there that includes the Lakers and Phoenix on the West Coast. So huge to go into the All-Star break at 6 over 500. Really, really big win. Of course, it would have been great to have the Bucks game, but look, I mean, you'll take this one. You'll take the tiebreaker is probably not going to matter with OKC, but you'll take it. Let me correct what I said a minute ago. I said they were virtually tied with the Clippers. The Clippers actually are now a full game ahead of Minnesota. They've played 2 less games, and they've won both of those. So Minnesota's 2 behind in the loss column. They do have the tiebreaker over the Clippers. They are 1 full game ahead of the Mavs. So 1 game out of the 6, 1 game clear of the 8, and only 3 games out of the 5 against behind the Lakers, who they also have a tiebreaker against. So a lot in front of the Wolves, and they've still won, 9 out of 13 games. 3 of those 4 losses being 1-possession losses. There's a lot to like about where the Wolves sit, given how the season started. Hopefully, DiVincenzo and Randall can come back healthy. Gobert and Conley should as well shortly after the All-Star break. So a lot to look forward to. All right, that's all I got for you today. Enjoy the All-Star weekend. I'll be back on Monday. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can also subscribe for the Locked On Wolves daily newsletter in your email inbox every day, Monday through Friday. Sign up at LockedOnDaily.com. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.